What is the perfect vehicle to electrify? If you said your hatchback or small SUV, you might actually be wrong, because while you were doing 35 to 40 Ks in your average daily commute, a van like this will do more like 150 Ks. What better way to remove carbon emissions from the environment than electrify some of our commercial vehicles, which right now are predominantly diesel.
That's a lot of money and emissions saved not burning diesel, which is why LDV is mixing things up in the mid-size van segment with its new eDeliver 7. Bigger and more modern than the popular diesel-only G10 which came before it, is the eDeliver 7 the most significant threat to the market-leading Toyota Hiace? Watch on to find out. Let's start with price and specs. The eDeliver 7 comes in 3 body styles and with a choice of 2 battery packs. The most affordable short wheelbase version with the standard range battery starts from a touch under $60,000 for ABN holders, and the range only moves by about $7,000 by the time you get to the top spec high roof version with the longer range battery pack. Check the range of prices on your screen now. This makes our electric eDeliver 7 range somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 more expensive than some of its key rivals, and nearly 20 grand more expensive than the diesel G10 in LDV's own range. However, the eDeliver 7 is more comparable in size to a Hiace compared to the smaller G10, offering delivery outfits and small businesses more room than before. It's also worth noting that the diesel version of this van is expected to arrive before the end of 2024, which may end up replacing the G10 altogether, so keep an eye out for that. On the design front, well, it's a van. It doesn't really have the same futuristic appeal as Hyundai's bold Staria, but it also looks a lot more modern than the G10. The same can be said on the inside, which is modern and decently appointed, but hardly revolutionary.
Hopping in the cabin, and often our tradie friends are a little bit forgotten when it comes to amenities, especially in things like vans, where they're kind of just seen as a tool of the trade and less something that you actually have to sit in for 8 or 9 hours a day. But in the cabin of the eDeliver 7, there's been some really big steps made. For a start, you've got like a nice leather-bound steering wheel. That's also heated. That's a rare luxury you see in a van like this. You've also got heated outboard seats as well. That's good not just because it's a luxury, but because it's energy efficient. It's better than using the air conditioning for your overall range. Elsewhere, you've got plenty of interesting storage options. So there's some hard plastic in here. I don't know what you put in here, keys maybe, something like that. There's a bay here which is great for your phone when you've got it cabled up to Apple CarPlay. Elsewhere around the cabin you've also got a few cup holders and bottle holders, things in the door, and an actual cigarette lighter, which is something rare. You don't really see that very often anymore. There are a few things missing in here though. For example, there's no dial for volume control. That is all touch based, and you've got a few shortcut buttons for the climate, which is nice, but you don't have the full array of functions. You do have to go through the shortcut buttons in the touchscreen to do that. It's a little bit of both, so it's an okay mix. The other thing you're missing out on is, while the seat is quite adjustable, there's no telescopic adjustment for the steering wheel. It only goes up and down. And there's a quite quaint analog set of dials in the dash as well. Elsewhere you have some clever features, but there are some things missing. For example, there's no overhead storage like you get in the Hyundai Staria. That's great for laptops and folios and such. But there are some hidden features with this bench seat here. Again, there's one configuration, so it's 3 seats across, but this center seat is quite versatile. It's got a drop-down kind of console here with a elastic strap, so you could put a laptop or a folio here. There's a little bay for a pen, which is great, and 2 cup holders in there as well when you're not using that center seat position, which is quite handy. There's also a storage bay underneath both of these seating positions. So if you flip that open, there's a great place to put something like your charging cables or tools if you've got them.
The cabin might feel the part, but how about the storage space? That is, after all, why you would consider a vehicle like this.
Okay, so does the load area and all these things match up to a combustion van? And I think you're going to be surprised, but I will say one thing: the eDeliver 7 is only available in 1 door configuration. That's a single sliding door on this side, no sliding door on the other side, and barn doors at the back. Hopping inside. One thing you do get that not every van gets is a properly lit area. There's an LED light up here, and the space in here, again, only 1 configuration. You can't get grates or different walls or anything like that. So you get 5.9 cubic meters of storage area in here, which sits between the Staria and the Hiace. So that's pretty clever in terms of the way it's spec'd, and its payload is actually higher than both those competitor vans at over 1,300 kilos, which again, quite impressive.
Brake towing capacity comes in at 1,500 kilos, which is nice to have considering many electric vehicles aren't even rated to tow. But one missing feature is V2L, or the presence of a full-size power outlet. What better way to make use of that high-voltage battery for tradies than letting it power their tools? That just seems like a missed opportunity to me.
What's under the engine bay of this electric van? Turns out, not a whole lot. Nothing, in fact, but under this plastic cladding, there is an electric motor which drives the front wheels, producing 150 kilowatts and 330 newton meters, and it's actually quite good, as we'll explore behind the wheel.
When it comes to range, you've only got 2 battery options to pick from, although the official range number will also change significantly depending on which body style you choose. Expect between 310 kilometers of driving range for the standard battery in a long wheelbase version, up to 362 kilometers for the long wheelbase with a larger battery. Keep in mind though, those numbers will be calculated with the vehicle unladen.
So, charging specs. These are particularly important for delivery drivers because you don't want to be waiting hours for your next delivery when your van needs to charge. And thankfully LDV have thought of this and specified this one appropriately. This one here that we're looking at today is a 77 kilowatt hour base model, and in here is its Type 2 charging port. That's the most popular kind, so you should be able to charge up at all the DC charging locations around wherever you're delivering. Now, the base model, 77 kilowatt hours, can charge at 78 kilowatt hours on DC. Sounds confusing, but it means a charging time of 43 minutes. Perfect, you can get on the road really quickly. And it's the same case for the larger 88 kilowatt hour battery, which has a larger charging capacity of 90 kilowatts on DC. So it's the same 43-minute charging time, regardless of which grade you pick. On AC, meanwhile, you've got 11 kilowatts of charging capacity, and that's great too, because it means you can charge this thing in roughly 8 hours. Perfect for overnight. Okay, so what's the eDeliver 7 like to drive? Because the thing is, these days in the van market, you've got some very heated competition, believe it or not. The Hi-Ace is much improved over the previous version where you sat over the front axle, for example, and Hyundai Staria almost drives like an SUV. It rides really well, it feels like an SUV from behind the wheel. So look, things are really impressive out there if you're a delivery driver. But how does this van compare? Because after all, it's electric, it forgoes diesel, and it's got a lot of batteries under the floor which could affect the ride quality. But I'm happy to say that even compared to LDV's previous offerings like the G10 and even the eDeliver 9, this seems like a really major step up. The steering's nicely weighted, this electric motor feels a little bit better tuned than some previous iterations. And the ride quality as well is quite impressive, and that's going to be down to those extra batteries under the floor that already put some weight on those springs, because usually it's the unladen ride that's quite uncomfortable, but here in the eDeliver 7 the unladen ride isn't too bad. It's not to the same quality as those rivals. That Hyundai Staria is just too impressive, for example, and it's the same for the Hi-Ace. That's got quite a good ride while unladen, but this is getting close, and that's pretty good. Our tradie friends deserve better after all, and that can definitely be said for some of the amenities in here. This 12-inch screen, for example, feels like one that's dropped out of a high-quality passenger car. It's got new software on it, which isn't laggy or annoying to use, and the functions are relatively straightforward. These seats seem quite comfortable too, if a little narrow. They've got quite a nice kind of padding to them though, so I don't foresee this being a vehicle that's going to be really uncomfortable after 8 hours behind the wheel. It seems quite compliant, it seems as though the seats aren't going to get on your nerves, it's not too noisy when it's bouncing around. There is a slightly stilted quality to the ride, but I'm going to assume that that's down to some pretty heavy duty springs underneath that need to control both the weight of the battery and this car's quite high payload as well. How's it performing on range though? That's something that's much more difficult to answer, because the thing is, the number that is provided, the WLTP number, that is for this van unladen. What you're not seeing is when it's loaded up with goods or supplies or tools, how much real world range you're actually going to get. There's also no efficiency number provided with this van, but on my drive loop, I've seen a little over 20 kilowatt hours to 100 kilometers. Now for a passenger car, that's pretty bad, but for a commercial vehicle, which has got such a big sort of cross section when it comes to pushing the air out of the way, and it's relatively heavy too with a big battery pack under the floor, it is pretty understandable. There are a handful of other small areas where this van isn't as polished as it maybe should be. The brake pedal, for example, feels a little doughy and distant, and visibility is not too bad, but it's not the best I've ever seen. I think this van would really benefit, for example, from a 360-degree parking camera because it's only got a reversing one in this one single spec that it's shipped in. Now, as an EV, you do get a few neat little energy-saving features, one of which being the heated steering wheel and seats. That's brilliant. Now, the other thing we should talk about is that electric drivetrain, because it's such a big boost for delivery drivers to not have to deal with the rattle of diesel in their day in, day out daily chores. It is nice and quiet in here, and in fact, this car emits like a Jetsons-esque sort of bubbling electric noise at low speed, which is kind of quaint, and that's to alert pedestrians of your presence, because it would be a bit worrying if it was just silent. I will say that this motor is actually really quite powerful. It's got a lot of get up and go. Now, we haven't tested it laden, and that would be interesting to see if it actually makes a meaningful impact on the amount of power available when you press that pedal down, but the figures are promising, and unladen, it feels really good. Now, there are 3 levels of regen as well, which is nice to see because you can adjust it to your preference. However, I will say that the level 3 tune is not quite a single pedal driving mode that you might have experienced if you've driven an EV before, or you might be expecting if you're hopping into an EV for the first time. So you do still have to hop on that brake pedal, which can take a little bit of getting used to. Still, it is a nice, smooth driving experience, and I think just that electric drivetrain alone is going to be such a comfort upgrade for so many commercial drivers that even if you're a private operator who's bulking at that extra cost, you might want to consider it. So overall, this leaves us with a delivery van that doesn't quite feel as well tuned as those industry leaders, your Hyundai Staria and your Toyota Hiace, but it's getting up there, and that's really impressive to see because it means that LDV has come so far from the products that have come before. This does feel quite nicely resolved. The electric motor is nice and powerful. There's big step ups when it comes to the software and even the ride quality. So I'm pretty impressed with what I'm seeing here. And for someone who it might be their first time adopting an electric vehicle onto their fleet, well, you could definitely do worse than one of these. Now, the other thing we should talk about is safety, because as I mentioned before, the eDeliver 7 has just one trim level, but that does get all of the safety equipment on every variant. So that includes your auto emergency braking, that includes things like blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert, as well as lane keep assist. It also gets some other features which can be a little bit annoying, things like traffic sign recognition with an alert that sounds if you go over the speed limit. Now, that is the only feature in this car that I had to turn off in my drive loop with it, because it does sound that beeping alarm quite often. Not necessarily because you're speeding, it's more because you're picking up things like 40 signs off the back of buses and off school zone signs when you drive past them. So it's not particularly smart in that way, and it is the feature that you might want to most turn off. But look, LDV isn't the only brand that gets this feature wrong. Even Hyundai gets this feature wrong. Even like Lexus gets this feature wrong sometimes. So I think it's quite a tame safety suite. I didn't find myself having to turn lane keep assist off, which is nice to see. And it's mostly in the background. You can even turn the sensitivity down for most of the systems if they are annoying you, and that's a great feature to have too. Now, LDV doesn't have an ANCAP score at the time that we shot this review for the eDeliver 7, but they promise us it's coming, so we'll be keeping an eye out for that maximum gold score in that commercial segment.
LDV continues to have a complex array of warranty terms across its whole range. It is frustrating to keep track of. Here in the eDeliver 7, you get a 5-year 160,000 kilometre warranty with 5 years and unlimited kilometres of roadside assist. As usual, the battery, which is sourced from SAIC's joint venture plant with CATL, the world's biggest battery manufacturer, has an 8-year and 250,000 kilometre warranty. Servicing, a key part of the puzzle for fleet operators and small businesses alike, is capped at a very specific $1,166.10 for the first 6 years or 90,000 kilometres. The kicker though is that the eDeliver 7's electric drivetrain only requires servicing once every 2 years or 30,000 Ks, which in my mind is much better than Toyota's 6 monthly intervals for its Hiace. It works out much cheaper too.
Okay, so it comes down to this. This van is roughly $15,000 more expensive than a combustion rival, and that might write it off for some individual operators. And while I do think it could be a little bit more versatile in terms of its door layout and offering something like V2L, which I think would be perfect for something like this, I think you're not compromising here. This is an electric vehicle with great range, it'll get you around for your last mile deliveries, and it's a great way for fleets to reduce their carbon emissions.